comes to the political world, something that came about last week was Joe Biden essentially securing the nomination to be the Democrat candidate for the president of the United States. And Joe Biden, late last week, in an effort to clearly try and court supporters of Bernie Sanders, unveiled a brand new plan of his own that seems to be very akin to a Bernie plan or to an Elizabeth Warren plan on student loan debt and what he would like to see done about that. Here's a snippet of a live stream that he did, I think it was Thursday evening, where he talked about his new plan that he wants to move forward with, and we'll get into some of the details and why it's so bad here in a moment.
The next package, this is already being discussed, should include student debt relief for at least $10,000 per person, to help ease the burden on young people who are already struggling to get by before the coronavirus. They're not whining, they're just out there saying, hey, look, I busted my neck. That's why the next bill should forgive a minimum of $10,000 of student debt for everybody with a debt when they pass this bill, just right off the bat. Keeping a position so when we come out of this, they're not further in the hole, that they're not so deep in the hole that they've been put into.
So I understand the challenges of student loan debt. To be sure, I still have about $15,000 in student loan debt. I've been very open and candid about that. I graduated from Regis University, a private school, in 2011. I was able to get out a year early and work some other angles to keep my debt load down. I'm now, I think, more than halfway through my debt burden that I had graduated with. But I still have $15,000 in student loan debt, and so I certainly understand the gravity of the situation. It is a challenge to pay back your debt and keep pace with the interest. That's what's been the biggest challenge for me, as it is for so many young people, is being able to keep up with the interest payments that are required without having that add significant amounts to your student loan debt burden. So Joe Biden puts forward this plan to try and help those who are deeply indebted with student loan debt, which I think is absolutely critical to keep in mind. There are a lot of Republicans and conservatives who poo-poo the issue, who say, we shouldn't worry about that. And they say we shouldn't worry about that because young people took out the loans and they should have known what was going on when they did so. They should have known that you couldn't declare student loan debt in bankruptcy. They should have known that you needed to take out this debt and should have tried to minimize it as much as you could. Okay, fair enough. But at the same time, in order to go to school in America today, you virtually have to take out some student loans. The cost has gone up dramatically in the past 30 plus years of a college education. It is now nearly $40,000 per student in tuition in order to go to one of these schools a year. And it is, it is about $40,000 that you're graduating with in student loan debt, I should clarify. It really varies on the school for what the cost is going to be. So it's when you graduate, it's nearly $40,000 that you're graduating in the debt burden. So that is a tremendous amount, and it does hold back purchasing homes. It holds back starting families. It holds back a lot of things that young people are not moving forward with, trying to take advantage of in their lives to move on. And now we're hit with this economic malaise, and it's a punch right into the gut for young people who've been trying to pay back their debt. But here is something important to keep in mind as we talk about Joe Biden's plan. And that is, the research shows, I think, quite definitively that the federal student loan system is the reason why, the way it is structured, the way our student loan system is structured, is the reason why student loan debt has gone so high. I want to quote Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, in a speech that she gave in 2018 to the Federal Student Aid Training Conference. She said, quote, "It took 42 years, 1965 until 2007, for the student loan balance to grow to $500 billion. It took only 6 years for the loan balance to double to $1 trillion in 2013. That's 1/7 the amount of time it took to get to $500 billion. And today, only 5 years later, FSA holds nearly $1.5 trillion in outstanding loans. In fact, on the federal balance sheet, student loan debt is the single most significant line item. That is dramatic. In 2008, the Bush administration and the Democratic Congress approved something called the Ensuring Continued Access to Student Loans Act. This basically began the nationalization of student loans, and it got worse in 2010 with the Health Care and Education Reconciliation Act. Directly tied to the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, this particular bill really led to direct lending from the federal government for student loans. We had seen dramatic increases in student loan debt over this period of time. So we got to $500 billion in 2007, and now we are at more than $1.6 trillion. That's because the way in which the federal loan system has been set up, and we'll talk about this in greater depth in the coming days and weeks, but the student loan system has been set up in such a way where I would argue it is more difficult to get into school than it is to get a student loan. The system has been structured in a way where colleges and universities are guaranteed the money up front. These institutions will get it no matter what. And so what do they do when the money's going to keep flowing because the federal government has been giving out student aid and even nationalized the system under President Obama? These institutions look at it and say, hey, it's free money. Let's keep raising the tuition. It doesn't matter what the students are going to school for, what their degree is. They could go for underwater basket weaving. And the higher ed institution is going to say, okay, that's fine. That's what you want to study for your major. Doesn't matter if you're not going to be able to get a degree with that major, but instead you're at least going to be able to go to school and yeah, you'll come out with the debt load. But hey, we're going to get the money up front no matter what, and we don't have any incentive to hold down the cost, particularly because here in America, it is virtually impossible to discharge student loan debt in bankruptcy. The only form of consumer debt that you cannot discharge in bankruptcy is student loan debt. Let that sink in for a moment. $1.6 trillion in student loan debt is out there right now, outstanding, and you cannot discharge it if you are deeply, deeply in debt and you find no way out. Now, this is something that was built up over time from the 1970s on to 2005 when it was solidified by the United States Congress. But the biggest problem with this is not just that the students or the borrowers can't discharge debt if you are so deeply in debt and you can't really pay back your loans, that the only other option is that you will default on your loans. The biggest problem with this is actually that there is no risk to the lender. Because if you suspect that maybe, just maybe, your borrower could end up going bankrupt and discharging their student loan debt in bankruptcy, you're going to be smarter. You're going to be more targeted in the loans that you're giving out. Instead, there's no risk to the lender. And because the colleges and universities have no skin in the game, they will feel comfortable just jacking up the price of college. So what I would do, one of the things that I would do, and then we'll get to Joe Biden's plan in just a second here, is I would enable borrowers to discharge their student loan debt in bankruptcy, once again. And also, it's important to make sure that the institutions are on the hook. So college and university, put them on the hook for a percentage of the losses in bankruptcy. If you go to a college, you graduate, and then you go onto the job market, and you end up declaring discharging your debt in bankruptcy, that institution should be on the hook. Your college should be on the hook for a percentage of the losses. Same if you are defaulting. If you default on your debt, it's 15, 20%, whatever it is, that should have to be paid back by the college or university, meaning they will have some skin in the game, some incentive to try and hold down costs. Also, there are bills like the Student Loan Repayment Acceleration Act from Colorado Senator Cory Gardner. You've also got the Student Loan let's see, the name of the bill is escaping me from the Employer Participation in Repayment Act is a bipartisan bill that's been making headway in Congress. And these two pieces of legislation would basically make it so that employers could provide tax-free support for their workers in paying back loans. That's a significant improvement, because what you've got in a situation like this is where an employer is able to provide support and that employee is working for it. It's not just that they're entitled. They're not just getting a handout. They're actually working and getting some benefit. I've talked with young people who have said, college graduates, in fact, a recent graduate told me she got 6 figures in debt from her undergraduate degree, now almost a year out of college. And she told me, I would love that kind of bill. Even before I would want to pay into a retirement plan that my employer offers, I would want to pay down my student loan debt. I like the tax-free idea. A lot of employers are clamoring for tax-free capabilities here because they know that there are a lot of millennials and Gen Zers who are looking for employers that will provide support in paying down their student loan debt. It's a great way to do it where you're working for it, so it's a benefit, but at the same time, you're getting tax benefits too. Win-win-win when you're talking about that, as well as talking about restoring bankruptcy protection. But Joe Biden's plan is a different story. Joe Biden would forgive all undergraduate tuition-related federal student debt from 2- and 4-year public colleges and universities for borrowers who earn less than $125,000 a year. That is a lot of Americans who would benefit from this type of big government program of just saying, we're going to clean the slate on $10,000, up to $10,000 in student loan debt. When it gets to the government paying, for example, the federal government would make your monthly federal student loan payments until your student loan debt is paid off. Those are two big things that the Biden plan would do, is basically say, we're going to forgive significant amounts of student loan debt. We heard the clip. Let's hear it one more time so that we can hear Joe Biden himself explain exactly what his policy proposal is.
The next package, this is already being discussed, should include student debt relief for at least $10,000 per person to help ease the burden on young people who are already struggling to get by before the coronavirus. They're not whining. They're just out there saying, hey, look, I busted my neck. That's why the next bill should forgive a minimum of $10,000 of student debt for everybody with a debt when they pass this bill.
Cancel at least $10,000 of student debt per person. If you earn less than $25,000 a year under Biden's plan, you'd make no federal student loan payments and no interest would accrue on your student loans. And also, if you earn more than $25,000 per year, you'd pay no more than 5% of your discretionary income toward federal student loan payments. And again, wanting to cancel at least $10,000 of student loan debt. Now, this may sound nice in theory, but the problem is that it doesn't take into account the underlying structure in the way in which the system is already set up and has been for decades when it comes to student loan debt, and how it's actually set up. We'll talk about that in the coming weeks. But the way that the system is structured is warped. It creates a problematic incentive structure, and this proposal would only make things worse by saying we'll just cancel the debt without dealing with the underlying challenges. Moreover, you diminish the role of personal responsibility. That is to say that somebody who took out student debt themselves, you diminish their responsibility to pay it back. And you also have significant increase in taxpayer costs. What would President Biden do in order to fund this? He'd repeal the high-income excess business losses tax cut that's included in the CARES Act. In other words, a tax cut to help with business losses would be repealed. A crisis policy with businesses? He would repeal that from the CARES Act and then fund it. How? New money? Like, we're talking about a bill that this administration of a Biden administration would be putting forward using funds that come from a temporary package. That doesn't make sense. You cannot fund something like this that would be billions and billions of dollars in this way. It's important to keep in mind the monetary aspect, but also the personal responsibility aspect and the incentive structure. That is to say, it would actually worsen the student loan crisis as opposed to improving it. I've done a lot of research on this. You've seen some videos, perhaps in our videos that we have run, where I've talked about this in greater depth as well. We will, in the coming days and weeks, have a greater wide-scale discussion on student loan debt and this crisis, but I think Biden's approach is the wrong way and would make things worse, not better. All right, that is it.